All right, everybody, welcome to the first Ember NYC of 2015. I'm glad we got some excitement in the house because you're going to need it. In addition to an awesome lineup and a lot of fun, as we always have, we have a little special activity that's going to involve all of you who want to participate tonight. And that's the EmberConf organizers have asked us and several other meetups around the world to capture some video footage to be used at EmberConf. And so Kevin Prentice, where's Kevin? Out right there in the back corner, is going to be walking around with a DSLR that shoots video, and it's going to be doing some kind of individual thing. So an example might be, hey, my name is Luke, and I've been coming to the Ember meetup since 2012, and my favorite thing about it is the pizza, or something like that. Or maybe I've been using Ember for a few years, I've met so many great people through Ember NYC, whatever you want. Anyway, it's all meetup focused, and we're also going to do some crowd shots, so sort of in the middle of the meetup, maybe between the lightning talks, the main talks, I'm going to ask you to all do some cheering and some fun like that, so it's going to be a good time. So I've got a couple of announcements to make, and I'm going to then open up the floor to announcements to you guys, so be thinking if there's something that you want to share. And first off, relevant to Kevin, who I just mentioned, and to Jorge. Jorge, where are you? Right, also in the back. Jorge and Kevin are the new co-organizers of Ember NYC. They have graciously stepped up to volunteer to help in various capacities. One of them is going to be getting our hacker hours going again for 2015. So for those of you who are our awesome hacker hours hosts, simple reach with the link, you're going to be hearing from Jorge about scheduling stuff. For those of you who are on the meetup list, you're going to be seeing hacker hours pop up, and they'll also be tweeting, helping organize, etc., etc. If you have any feedback about the meetup, you can always see me or either Jorge or Kevin. So thank you guys. Quick round of applause for them for stepping up. In addition, on the volunteer front, I want to thank Lee Nussbaum, who's in the back on the AV equipment. We are live streaming tonight for the second time. So we are sharing Ember NYC in real time with the rest of the world, and which is very exciting. And I got a lot of great feedback after the first time we did it. So I will, when we do Q&A segments, I'm going to do my usual run around with the microphone. It's extra important since we've got people watching live at home. So with that, I have a couple of quick words to say, announcements. We are at the January meetup right now. Our February meetup is going to be February 26th. So put it in your calendar. I'm looking for talks. If you've got something you'd like to share, talk to me. And we're going to be getting hacker hours scheduled that will occur in between now and then. So that's announcement one. Announcement two, I already mentioned EmberConf. There are still some tickets available for EmberConf. I understand that they're going very quickly. But if you go to emberconf.com, you can do it. It is March 3rd and 4th in Portland, Oregon. If you didn't make it last year, it is an awesome event. It's super well run. The food was like the best conference food I've ever had. The talks are great, and the crowd is almost as good as Ember NYC. Another milestone, community milestone, we crossed 500 add-ons on Ember.js.addons.com today, which catalogs, yep, pretty awesome. This catalogs all of the NPM modules that designate themselves as an Ember add-on. So that's pretty cool. And then I'm not going to do an in-depth talk about it, but just want to make sure that people know that it's around, because I worked hard on it over the holidays. It's my recent contribution to Ember that I did is the component helper. So you can pass kind of a dynamic bound property to this new component helper to let you dynamically select what component to render if you have that need. So that is going to be turned on for this current beta cycle, I think. Next beta cycle, something like that. It's coming soon. It's in master already. So with that, I want to turn the floor over to anybody who has announcements, and you can step up and use a mic, or I can run a mic over to you. Who has something to share? Going once. Twice. Katie, where are you? Or Michelle, do you guys have anything to share?
Michelle and I are now offering Ember.js consulting if anybody's looking for something.
Awesome. Ember Consulting from Katie and Michelle. Codeallday.com, is that right? Good stuff. Cool. Any other announcements? Anybody hiring that wants to plug? Jorge in the back.
Hi. We're looking for a full-stack developer working with Ember, Ember CLI, Rails backend with multiple APIs and a backbone PhoneGap app. And so yeah.
Are you open to it becoming an Ember PhoneGap app? Maybe. All right. Cool. So with that, I'm going to invite up our first speaker, and this was quite serendipitous because I have been helping as part of. Oh, I almost forgot to thank our sponsors. Let me do that real quick. Thank you, Pivotal Labs, where we are. Pivotal Labs, yes. Pivotal Labs has been an awesome host of Ember NYC for years now, always coming up big with the pizza and the beer every month with a beautiful space. For those of you who don't know, Pivotal Labs is an agile consulting company doing lots of projects for startups to big companies to government organizations, nonprofits alike, Rails, JavaScript, iOS, Java, across the board, great stuff. If you are a developer who wants to get a job somewhere where you're going to learn a ton and pair with great people, you should consider Pivotal. If you have a company that needs help, you should consider Pivotal. And if you're in either of those camps, you should talk to Micah Young, who's sitting in the back. Micah is a manager here at Pivotal and my brother-in-law. So that works out. Cool. In addition to Pivotal, our Hacker Hour sponsors, Simple Reach and Movable Ink, have been awesome and will continue to be. Simple Reach has a new space, so the next time we have a Hacker Hours there, it's going to be awesome. And then finally, my company Yap and Yap Labs is a sponsor of the meetup, and Yap Labs does Ember training and consulting. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can talk to me or to Ray, Wave Ray, or to Steph. We're here. Cool. So now, as part of that our consulting, I've been working with a company locally that provides an API for restaurants to do online ordering, among other things. And they showed me an app that was built on top of their API, and they said, like, look how awesome this is. And I looked, and my Ember Inspector Tomster popped up. I was like, hey, it's an Ember! Awesome! And so a few days later, and I tweeted it, you may have seen it, it's called beautiful, really beautiful site. And a few days later, I got an email from the gentleman who built it. And he said, hey, I'm looking to help my client hire somebody to kind of take over the site. Could I make an announcement? I said, you could do more than make an announcement. You can show us the site and talk to us about what it was like to build it. And so with that, I'm really excited to introduce Hugh Francis from Gin Lane. Sound rightly? Okay. Gotcha.
So my name's Hugh.
Not working? Here, why don't you take this?
So my name's Hugh. I'm a full stack developer at an agency called Genlane Media. We're in Chinatown and we do connect systems and sort of interesting experiences on the web and also apps. But most recently we just finished a pretty big Ember app. It's actually our first Ember app. And it was for a company called Sweetgreen, who are a salad company. Moving from DC, I think they've got about 35-ish locations at the moment. So this is kind of like an online ordering system for that company. And look, I didn't know you were, that's Olo, right? I didn't working with them, but that's cool. So anyway, this is the app. So basically what I'm going to do is give like a bit of a click through as to like what the app's all about, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we thought that was really powerful about Ember. But to preface this, we're basically in a process where we're handing this app off over to the client. They're ready to hire a full stack developer in-house. They're a really awesome brands. They get technology, they get design. The food is actually awesome. I eat it a lot. It's a sick job. It's a sick job. And we're just like trying to make sure that we find a really strong developer to maintain it, because there's a lot of moving parts, and we don't want to like hand it off and have it full of shit. So, okay, so let's get started. We're in New York. We want to order from Tribeca. So these are all their salads. I recently had this bok choy chicken lentil stew. It's pretty cool. And this is kind of, I want to say my magnum opus of development. It looks incredibly simple, but there's quite a lot going on here. So when you hit modify, you're given this sort of enormous interface to create this salad. And this quantity button and the stuff that happens behind the scenes here is insane. But yeah, so that's what the app's about. It's all mobile responsive, and it's really stable. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about was something that gets overlooked a lot, I think, when Ember developers are talking at things like this, and it's how good Ember is when it comes to working with design and working with strong design. So a long time ago I started as a designer, and I wanted to talk about this thing that I've been calling agile design, which is kind of a silly name, but it's the best name I can think of. So at Genlane we've been trying to essentially parallelize our design and development as much as possible. So essentially when we design stuff, we try and basically just do wireframes and have the development cycle kick off at that time, to the point where when we actually start implementing those designs, a lot of the development has been done and there's kind of like no technology debt for iterating on those designs. So this is something we've tried to do a lot, but we found it most easy with Ember because it's got such a predictable view hierarchy. So these are the tools that I think were most important when we were doing this. The predictable view hierarchy in Ember gives you sort of like an understanding of what you're going to find on every page, and that's very consistent across the board. And then using Sass, what we did is instead of breaking up our CSS namespacing by sort of what's this and what's that and where we expect things to be nested, we broke them out on a route and resource level. I'll get into that in a bit. And then we just use class names and class name bindings, and then we also use some design techniques, which is best summarized as sort of creating style tiles. And finally, the most awesome thing was this service called Layer Vault, which is essentially source control for design. But a long time ago, like a few years ago, it got a pretty bad rap as being like kind of unstable. But we started using it for this project to give it another chance, and it was fantastic. Really hard on these guys. So, I mean, this is kind of basic stuff, but it's more of a focus on exactly how we structured our CSS and how that helped us iterate on design really quickly, without having that sort of CSS situation where you like change one CSS class and things fall over on routes that you never even knew were in the app. So essentially, when you're building an app, you can always expect that there's going to be this application level view, and that's the thing that bolts on to the body. View isn't quite the right word. That's the thing that bolts onto the body, and that's where your app is initialized. So you get this hook root element, and then you get. So essentially, we try and match that up with a SAS file. So in this case, this is app.scss. And then from here, we import all of our components, all of our routes, and all of our resources. These are all CSS files. So as we go through, this is just like a kind of a contrived example, but I'm just going to rip through it really quickly. Let's say we have a Flash outlet. Now what we do is we use the Ember component class names to give this a top-level class. So this is the absolute top-level class that's going to be on the page for Flash outlet. So then, in our components directory, we have a Flash outlet.scss, and the top level is also Flash outlet. So that's on the very top level of your CSS file, and that styles that component globally. Again, same situation with navbar. I just wanted to put it in because I like to use tag names if possible, and in that case, I do that. But again, it's the same concept. Okay, so now we've got, in this example, a post resource. So your markup's going to look like this. Every single template file that we use is wrapped in just one single CSS class. So in this case, a div with the ID of post. And inside of that, we have our outlet, and we have any items that sort of global across that resource. So then under resources, we have posts. Really straightforward. And now, in our post show, we have post show, and again that matches up to my CSS file. Now this is where it's like really interesting and powerful, in that let's say we have another Flash outlet, and we want that Flash outlet to only be a queue of things that come from things that are associated with post show. So this is something that's only ever going to appear nested under post show ID. So in that case, we can apply sort of route or resource level styling to global components and kind of override them to match that template. So it's super simple, but I think it's like really powerful when it comes to ensuring that that your CSS doesn't sort of override things you don't want it to, and that's just power that's come from Ember having this incredibly predictable view model. So super simple, but yeah. So this other concept we had was this style tiles thing, and it's actually live in production because we think it's kind of cool. But essentially, there's this style guide that we developed for the Sweetgreen the app. So as we went through and built the app out, we realized, oh, we need this component. Let's quickly wire it up with that same CSS structure and template structure, and then we could have our front-end markup guy go through and sort of build the component in a way that wouldn't interrupt anything else that was happening in the repo, kind of like in a controlled environment. So he could iterate on these components without messing anything up. So this is like a live component that exists on this page, but it's essentially a style tile for a validated import. So yeah, we put a lot of thought into how we're going to be able to iterate quickly on design. So yeah, and I guess I could show you guys layer vault really quick. I think it's pretty cool, and it's actually a good chunk of it's actually written in Ember, which is great. So when it came to adding this double portion functionality, we had our designers use this layer vault tool, and it was kind of like served as a central place without any like downloading Illustrator files and reopening them and slicing things out and all of that stuff. It's just a central place where we can see this, and you can also see revisions that happen to the design over the timeline. So So yeah, that's everything I got. But if anyone's interested in working for Sweetgreen, I've got like a lot more information to tell you about those guys. It's very exciting and cool stuff. And look, I hope you don't mind, but I just wanted to quickly mention this. So anyone who's ever worked with Ember, sorry, anyone who's ever worked with Spree probably knows how awful its front end is. I'm in the process of rebuilding their entire front end and eventually back end all in Ember, and breaking it out into the same modules that exist in their engine. So it's been really fun and easy, and if anyone wants to work on it with me, let's do it. So yeah, that's everything.
Awesome. Let's take a couple of questions for you, Hassan.
So I'm curious about that style guide. Is that actually something that is part of style tiles, or is it something like KSS, or is it something you just built from scratch?
So the style guide's just a regular Ember route, and we just like declare the components on that route, and then our CSS guy can kind of just rip, and basically all he needs to look at is the component file, like the component template file, and the matching CSS file, and that's like a little contained environment for that guy to sort of iterate on.
Sweet. Yeah, because we've used KSS with Rails before. It's similar to that, but the KSS for Node is pretty terrible. But that looks way better.
Thank you.
Doing KSS for Node.
Oh, one more question. Okay, I have a question. So first of all, awesome stuff. It's great to see, and the fact that you're working on this Spree project is really cool, and I think we should do a hacker hours kind of associated with this. I think it would be a great idea. I'd like for folks to get kind of a sense of like scope of a project like this. So how many people worked on it? How long did it take you?
So in total it was 4 Rails engineers and 1 like designer, also front end markup guy. And it was the best part of about 7 months, but that includes like a bit of scoping and a bit of QA and all that stuff. So yeah.
Good stuff. Well, I actually ordered lunch on it today, and it was delicious and beautiful. So kudos.
Nothing broke.
Nothing broke. Awesome. Cool. Thanks again. Is Corey here? Corey? Okay, we're gonna get. Oh, he is. Come on up. So our next speaker, while he gets set up, is a partner in what I can confidently say is one of the best Ember consulting firms in the country. 201 Created is Matt, who you're going to be hearing from later, and Corey and friends, I guess. And I've known both Matt and Corey for a long time in the New York tech community. Great guys, have done a ton of good in our little tech world. So we're excited to hear tonight from Corey about a Ember data adapter we're working on. I'm sure there's a green light. Hey Lee, also, I don't know what the status is. I just saw a tweet saying might be some audio issues in the live stream, for what it's worth. You're on live stream.
All right. Is this the right ear? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Cool. So as Luke, thanks for the nice introduction, Luke. As Luke mentioned, my name's Corey Forsyth, and I work, I have a Rails, or a Ember consultancy called 201 Created with Matt. And so, for a client project recently, we, they had a HAL style API, and we we decided to work on like an Ember data adapter for it. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about what HAL is, because it was sort of a new concept to me, and it was interesting to learn about, and then a little bit of how we extended Ember data or made our own adapter to work with it, and maybe some like general ideas of like how you would do the same thing if you wanted to build your own Ember data adapter. So anyone know, like, familiar with HAL? Hands? Okay, good. So I can just say anything. I'm not an expert by any means. I have a lot of links at the end for people who want to follow and find a lot more. But yeah, it stands for Hypertext Application Language. It was created in 2011, and it is a hypermedia API, which is a big buzzword. And so we'll step back a second, ask what a hypermedia API is. Steve Klabnik talked here like last fall, I think, about hypermedia APIs, and he did a really good job. So I'll just give a brief overview. They are verb-oriented as opposed to noun-oriented. Like your standard Rails API is sort of concerned with getting verb or nouns and doing things with nouns and finding collections of nouns and stuff like that, and then mapping HTTP verbs, the few actions you have there, onto those nouns. Hypermedia tries to flip that and makes it all about you. They use the word drive a lot in hypermedia API explanations. It's like you are driving changes in application state. It has this very awkward acronym, HATE-OAS. Looks like hate toast. It stands for Hypermedia as the Engine of Application State. And the idea, yeah, is that you are getting a resource, and that resource is sort of telling you how you're moving through like a big state machine of your own, and at every given point, the response from the server is telling you like links that you can take to change the state that you are in at your state machine. JSON API, which is probably a little bit better known, is also it considers itself a hypermedia API. So going back to HAL. HAL is much more minimal. It's optimized for developer onboarding, and we'll sort of go into a few examples. It's, yeah, like I said, it's very minimal. This is a valid HAL document, just the empty JSON object. It makes no real, there are very few requirements. There are a few optional things and some reserved properties, but otherwise HAL is sort of like it's up to you, a lot of it. So here, this is also a valid HAL resource response. There's no namespacing or nesting or anything. It just comes back to the JSON object with some information. It has two special reserved keys. Like you can do anything you want with a HAL response other than do something unexpected with underscore embedded or underscore links. So an underscore embedded is for embedding values. Your standard resource collection, like get users, would return an underscore embedded with all the individual user objects to come back, for instance. Underscore links is how it is a hypermedia API. That's where it tells you like what actions, what verbs you can take from any given state that you are in. Queries is another sort of awkward acronym. I think it stands for Compact URI, and it's like a way. I'm actually not going to go too much into it. It's a way that HAL provides to like provide auto documentation. It's worth reading up on in the spec. It's interesting. All three of those things are optional. Like I said, HAL is very minimal. It doesn't make a lot of constraints on you. Here's an example of a user's collection. Has that top level underscore embedded key. So like as opposed to maybe JSON API or other like active model serializers, there's no top level resource collection name like users. You actually have it. You have an embedded set of things in this resource. It also does something really nice, which is it allows you to consider the user's collection as its own resource, so you can have properties on it. HAL doesn't have metadata, any formal concept of metadata, and like in JSON API and stuff, we sort of kludge that on by adding a meta key in the response, but I think this actually sort of like maps sort of nicely this way. Like this is metadata about your user's collection, and you don't have to do any sort of like awkward construction to make it happen. So here's what links look like. It's again that special property underscore links, special key name. It's optional, but almost all resources will come back with a self link to sort of tell you where you are. And actually that self link is probably broken. And then it will tell you the other things you can do. So in this case, you can get my pets, and if you follow that link, that will take you. And so you notice the link itself has the target URI in it, which is an interesting property of HAL and hypermedia APIs in general. That's why I think people like them a lot, is because they put the onus onto the resource provider to tell you how to transfer through it. You don't have to have the shared idea that pets always live at users ID pets. It can just tell you, here's the link to pets. It could change it tomorrow, and the next time you get that user, you would follow a different link and just follow it. So it's like it's trying to decouple you from your API structure. So yeah, in HAL you have basically resources and links. resources have links, and resources have embedded other resources potentially. They have their own state, which is the data, and then the links have a URI and like a relation name. And they have a couple other properties. You can do templated links and things like that, but for the most part, that's the gist of it. I lifted this from the HAL creators website, sort of like a visual construction of it. You can see how they could, the dot 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 there, it could recurse arbitrarily deep, and so that's another thing that sort of makes HAL different from JSON API, is that in HAL you can have embedded objects at any level of the tree, and so that was like the only real challenge for building an Ember data adapter for this, and I'll talk about it in a second. But HAL doesn't try to do the flat structure that JSON API does, where you have side-loaded things and they sort of all live at the top level. In HAL you just have a bunch of users. The users could embed, the users could embed other, like their pets, and the pets could embed their, well, you wouldn't embed their owners, but you can continue embedding things as much as you want. Like, I guess you have to watch out on your own for recursive or circular structures. Cool. And so HAL and JSON API do share a few things. They're both hypermedia APIs, and because they sort of have this links concept, so I think they have the same goals. HAL is just a lot more minimal about it. So in order to make an Ember data adapter to use with HAL, I'll take a second to sort of talk about the major components of like an Ember data adapter, or how Ember data works. I guess the third one that I'm leaving off here is the store, but otherwise you have the adapter and the serializer, and those are the two big pieces of it. The adapter is there to sort of like map your objects onto URLs and figure out how to go out to a server, how to construct a URL to find a collection on the server, or find an individual object, or post something to that server. And then the data adapter will use the serializer to understand the response that comes back, right? So it'll take like a JSON payload, turn it into something that it can map onto your Ember data objects, your models. Let's see, so the serializer then, it also is used on the other side. So when you're pushing something up to your cloud API or something like that, the serializer is there to map your model back into a JSON payload that you can push up. Yeah, the serializer will normalize the incoming payload and extract it, and then push stuff into the store. So in order to make HAL and Ember data play well together, had to recognize that Ember data's store has its own format of payload that it wants, which is a lot like JSON API, not exactly the same, but it's got that side-loading idea, and it wants like the top-level namespace that you're giving a user, which is a user with the data. And so a lot of what we did with the adapter serializer really is just restructure that into the form that Ember data store expects. And Ember data will use links if they're given, so they don't come in the right format from HAL directly for Ember data use, so we have to rewrite those a little bit. And then finally, since Ember data has the concept of like the meta for a collection, and HAL doesn't, sort of had to find a way to map that on, and I'll talk about how we did that. So the Ember data HAL 9000 is the name of our repo. It's an Ember CLI add-on, so you can add it if you want to try it. And so ironically, it has an adapter that it provides, but doesn't do anything special with the adapter, because HAL is actually it's a serialization format only. It's really only, it doesn't specify anything about how you push data up. It's all about how you map resources coming down. So the adapter is just empty adapter. And then the serializer restructures those payloads from HAL style to Ember data's store expectation style. It unnests arbitrarily nested embedded objects into side loads, and it uses a heuristic to derive metadata. What I wanted to say, we did this work in conjunction with Aptable. They were our client who had the adapter, or the HAL API, and they were kind enough to let us extract this into like an open source thing to share. So I wanted to say thanks to them and mention their hiring, and you can look for them after. So yeah, the way the adapter, the serializer works is we override the normalize method, which is called for every individual item that is being sort of like destructured by the serializer. Normalize gets called on that hash, and it gives you some other information about like what type you are normalizing at that moment, stuff like that. And that's the place where we take the underscore links, which come along with every object, and we just write them to links which is what Ember data expects, and we map them from their rel name, like self or pets or whatever, into just the if itself, like the URL. And then finally, we also override extract along with extract single and extract array, and that's where we do the work of sort of like walking through the data structure, taking underscore embeds, replacing them on their parent with an ID, and then putting them in like a side-loaded sort of like array on the top level. So this is an example of how we would move from the HAL format on the left side there to the store expected format on the right. You see we add a pet key to the user object, we put it under the user top level key, and then we make an array of side-loaded pets. And I mentioned that HAL has no formal concept of metadata, but I pointed out that for those collection resources, it's got data that is associated with that group of resources. And so what we did with the adapters, we just make the presumption that those are the metadata. So we essentially don't do anything special to grab metadata for singular resources, but we do for collections. We take anything that's not part of that embedded hash and call it the metadata for it. So it ends up working pretty well. So in this example, total2 is your metadata for the user type. Yeah.
Pause.
Okay.
Pause button. 30 seconds. At the end, click pause.
Okay. And yeah, so I'll mention too that yeah, Ember data will follow links if they're in the right format. So when we push things into the store, I mentioned the serializer rewrites those underscore links to links and gets rid of the href key and just sets them as their target URI. And so the code there on the bottom, if you can see it, will after you've fetched the user and you ask to get the pet for it, Ember data will follow that URL instead of what it might do otherwise, which would be like, you know, /pets ? Or users, I don't know, yeah, pets ? User ID equals 1 or whatever. And so that's pretty nice because this is where your API can sort of drive it. You don't have, like, that URL could be, you know, users 500 /pets/12 or something like that, anything random, and it would just follow it and grab the pet for you. You don't have to have that coupled understanding between your API and your data. So thank you very much. I have a bunch of slides. I have the slides online and a bunch of links here, so there's a lot more to read about all this stuff if you're interested. I would encourage you to check it out. Yeah.
Awesome. Any questions for Corey?
If someone had to choose between sticking to JSON API or using HAL, what would you say?
The question is sticking to JSON API or using HAL. I like HAL a lot now that I've used it, and JSON API actually. So I think most of the API stuff that you probably touch, especially if like you're coming from Rails and using some of those adapters, it's not true JSON API. Like I don't know if they include links. Like I don't know what serialization you're using, but active model serializers I don't think does. HAL, like I can speak from experience and say HAL's able to show. It's the developer onboarding experience is really nice because like you have this thing here and you can follow these links around, and so like this is for Apptable. If I want to see like what an app looks like, I just follow and I can see, oh, these are the things that come with an app, and I can get all the operations for this service, and you just sort of like follow it around. It's really nice. Like I use that all the time. I was like, oh, what's the format? I'm gonna make a new model for Ember data. Here's how I do it. Just grab it. You do have the same thing. That's true. Yeah. I think I would probably use HAL honestly, just because JSON API is so complex. Like it has a lot of specification for how you are supposed to push things up to the cloud and stuff like that. So I think this is easy to map into your mind. I think there needs. I actually haven't used the Ember data JSON API adapters, and maybe they're really nice, and they abstract that entirely away. In which case, I think it's the same as sort of go with what becomes well. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and that comes up a lot. I think like on the HAL discuss man, I guess I was sort of perusing it. since there's no specification for like how you serialize data that you're going to post or put or something like that, if you look through, you'll see there are frequently topics raised also where people like want to add the verb to the link, and Steve Klabnik is always there to crush them. So yeah, I mean, like, yeah, if you go read, you'll sort of see some of his ideas about it, but you have to figure it out for yourself. This is sort of the answer for like how you're going to serialize pushing it up. That like, it doesn't specify it, but HTTP verbs they have semantic meanings that you can use and stuff like that. It's not like if you read. There's a link there to an interview with Mike Kelly, the founder or the creator of HAL, and he talks about that too. He's like, it's not intended to be 100% automated. It's intended to be like much better for automated agents to traverse, but not to solve the entire problem. Yeah.
Give it up for Corey.
Thank you.
All right, so Tim, if you can start to come up and get set up wherever you are. And while Tim's doing that, I have just a couple of questions I meant to ask. Cool. Almost as many as going to EmberConf. That should be a lot higher because following Ember Sherpa on Twitter is a lot cheaper than going to EmberConf. Cool. It would be pretty awesome if Ember Sherpa was actually like watching this on, we have a live stream and stuff like that. How many people think Ember Sherpa is watching us right now? A lot of people think so. How about you? You're in the front, sir. Do you think Ember Sherpa is watching right now?
Definitely, this is the best place to be.
So I'm excited to introduce to you Ember Sherpa.
All right. Thanks, guys. So I came here to be here with all you guys and to see this awesome meetup. And I was hoping I wasn't gonna talk, but I'm talking again. So I have these stickers that of Ember Sherpa, Tomster, and I want to give them away. So I have some questions, and I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but I'm going to ask them, and then people are going to answer them, and then I'll have 3, and then maybe I'll give away more. Okay, so let's see. 1 second.
How it's going to work. After Ember Sherpa asks the question, you raise your hand if you have the answer. First hand I see, I'm going to run over to, and you can answer.
Okay. So first question is, what is the best way to mock an API request in Ember testing?
Mock jacks?
What is it?
Jacks?
The answer was mock jacks.
That's not the answer that I'm looking for. It's the thing is probably a few good answers, but it's not the answer that I'm looking for.
Okay, over here.
Pretender?
Yes. That is the answer that I'm looking for. I think it's the best answer, and that's the answer
He wins
I'm
a
gonna
sticker.
give a sticker to.
Pretender is just the router. It uses the same route recognizers that the router uses for URL matching on the Ajax mocking side. So anything that works on your Ember app for URL matching will work for same tech. It's nice.
That's a
All right.
good reason.
Next question.
Okay. He already has a sticker. So next question is, what helper should you aggressively remove when HTML bars hits Ember?
Andre in the back.
I don't know if it's what you should do, but it's what I'll do. Bind adder.
Yeah, that's the one.
Nice.
Should have grabbed it. I had a feeling he was going to answer it. Okay, so last question. What deprecation was added in Ember 1.10? Yeah. What was deprecated in Ember 1.10?
object controllers?
No.
So secondhand.
Although it might be, but no, that's not the.
Before observers.
Yes, that's the one.
Well done.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, I'm gonna go out and drink after, so I have a few more stickers. And if I get drunk, I'll give them all away.
Awesome. Thank you, Taras. Our next speaker has been using Ember since Ember was not Ember yet. Back in the Sprout Core days, well before our friends Yehuda and Tom were working on Sprout Core. The gentleman in front of you was building Sprout Core apps. In fact, the app that he's working on, he has nurtured from pre-Ember 1.0 all the way to today. And so he's going to, our friend Tim Evans is going to talk to us tonight about refactoring Ember apps.
Thanks so much. Thanks. I'm Tim. This is some of the things that I like. I'm a senior developer at Paddle 8. Paddle 8's an online auction house. I work on Archivate, which is an inventory management system. It's a Ruby on Rails API and an Ember.js app. It's come from various forms before that, but that's what it is now. So I'm going to talk to you about refactoring our personally experiences, refactoring our Ember.js app for 2.0. So it's good to look at why you should refactor your app and what there should be reasons why you should do it from like a business side. So one, documentation is relevant, but Trek's working on getting versioned documentation out really soon, so that's less of an issue. But at the same time, if you're like Square, I believe, has some pre-1.0 apps up on production or just 1.0, so it makes it difficult to onboard new developers on your teams, which is the second point. You can get more developers on your team understanding your Ember app quicker. Your app gets faster with upgrading and refactoring your app. It's probably going to be more stable because the new concepts and the approved route to take leads to more dependable and guessable end results. The community benefits because if you are upgrading and trying out the beta versions, they can look at and see, these are my pain points, and they will address them. And they're really good at addressing your pain points at a relatively quick manner. And then it's easier to upgrade the quicker you do it because changes are very minimal between versions. So we'll look at our clients page in Archivate. So this is just what it would look like, and this is still not refactored out. And so we'll just go through a quick case study and seeing how I would refactor this out from the current version. So right now we're using controllers for all these. So this is an email addresses controller and phone numbers controller, and this is at email address and phone number. They actually have primary and non-primary states, so it's slightly more complicated than what I'm going to go through because you can sort them and stuff like that. So it looks like this. It's not very pretty. I'm using all sorts of things that are being deprecated quickly at the moment. So it also has things in controllers, which is not recommended. So add email address, the button is in a controller. The route, it seems to be in the proper place though, so that's good. So I'm gonna have a few quotes in here. So this is a note from the 2.0 RFC. Moved to Ember CLI, and so I think this is a good point to just be like, hey, here's some helpers. Stuart Stanley has it's sort of a work in progress for migrating your apps to Ember CLI, which is great. It's still work in progress, but I believe I saw commits that were recent on it, so that's great. And Brian Donovan at Square has decaffeinate for all those using CoffeeScript because ES6 is being the formal way to go forward on Ember, so CoffeeScript doesn't play nice, basically. So back to the app. So router controllers are going to be removed. So there's a problem already with how I've structured things. Actions are not a good idea on controllers anymore. So I need to find a home for my controllers. You can choose components, routes, or services. Services aren't really there yet, but you can implement them in a very custom manner using app inject and whatnot. It's available on the guides, but I'm not going to go into detail about that. I'm going to go into detail about components and routes and how I structure. I usually choose components for things that are just UI based, and I choose routes for anything that touches a model or acts as the store or whatnot. The other thing, context switching forms of each and with are being deprecated. So you understand what that means? The implicit each, where this is the context inside the helper, is no longer good. So you should quickly try to remove those because you can. So it means 2.0 will look like this. You will have, it's actually even more different. They have block parameters now in 2.0. It's actually available on 1.11, which is great. The index is actually live bound, which is awesome. That's been a while. And 1.8, if you're going to implement the same thing for easy refactoring into the 2.0 syntax, I would do it like I'm doing in our app currently, this style, where I name the parameter and then I pass the index via view.contentIndex, which is seems to be going the way of the dinosaur in terms of my difficulties upgrading with that. So this is how I would refactor the email address form. So it just, everything's explicit now. It just pulled out it from the loop, and now everything's in the route. So the controller's gone now, which is great. Everything's just in an each loop, and it's simpler. I can actually test the component because components are nicely isolated. It was harder to test. I was using acceptance tests before. So any questions for anybody? Because I feel like everybody has little pain points upgrading, and it's important to talk.
Questions?
I saw angle brackets in 2.0.
Yep.
Was that a component? Is that like the new syntax for components? All right.
Yep. New syntax for components.
Optional, right? Curly braces or angle brackets? Is mine
So angle brackets are going to probably be the acceptable way of doing things, and you have to say that it's mutable. Because they're going to make things read-only bindings all the way down, and you have to explicitly say that it's read and write-only bindings. So if you want to just keep the status quo, it makes it easier to use curly braces. But if you know you're not going to be editing the data, or you're editing data inside of it, like I am with the email addresses, you can just pass it in, and you are sure that nobody's setting the email address on it, which isn't really much of a security issue, in my opinion.
Cool, and we're going to see some more syntax later, some of 2.0 syntax later in Matt's talk.
Okay, and thanks. And we're also hiring, so yeah. That's
awesome, cool. Thanks, Tim.
Yep.
So our next speaker is a late addition to the agenda. He is Mike. Oh, Tim, you forgot your Ember Sherpa sticker. He popped in today and said, "Hey, you know that idea that we talked about, a while back about modals? I built it today, and it works. And it's awesome." And I said, "Great, you're fourth up." I'm happy to introduce, welcome back for the umpteenth time at Ember.NYC, my colleague, Ember core team member, and prolific open source contributor, Stefan Penner.
Is Dennis here today? Dennis? No, he didn't show up. All right. So a few months ago, Dennis was an intern with us. He was like, "How do I make like a modal? But sometimes there's like position absolute things that cut stuff off, and Well, you know, with jQuery, you just append the modal to the body and do CSS and wonderful things happen. But in Ember, you kind of lose the bindings, and it's not quite as nice. I just want this modal to be rendered basically right there in the template, but escape all of the overflow hiddens and position absolutes and stacking context and stuff. So I was like, well, it'd be really cool if you could just render it there, but Ember actually rendered it somewhere else. So you could just declare it in one place in the template, and Ember just put it somewhere else. So the brief example here is I have a button that opens and closes a modal. That's pretty cool. And I type something, and there's a binding, and there's an action. And this is great. Oh, yeah, one sec. I need a third hand. So that might screw up some of the positioning stuff I did, maybe. But, so this is great, it's wonderful. The example is, so I have a button, I have an input, and if the A is true, we display the modal thing, which does stuff. But then you have a complicated app, and the complicated app gets more complicated, and all of a sudden you have different stacking contexts, and this becomes deeply nested in some list view somewhere, and we all know list view does crazy stuff, so let me simulate that by fixing this typo. So now we have our modal is hidden, and that sucks. But I don't want to like change my code because I really like the declarative. I really like the declarative nature of, you know, here's my component that happens to be a modal. So when I tried to do this, when Dennis mentioned it, I tried that evening and it was a disaster. Basically, Ember was at some version pre-metal views. So HTML bars and all this metal view stuff has some performance side effects that are positive, but largely it's a really awesome refactoring of the view layer to allow more flexibility and to allow some cool stuff to happen. So I wanted a view that would, if I wanted to, render itself somewhere entirely different in the DOM, but still be the same place in the Ember hierarchy. So I tried again the other day, yesterday, to do this in Ember 1.7 because that was what the client app was at. And I was like, Chris, you got to help me on this. I can't do it. So we both sat there for a while, and it didn't work out so well. But turns out it's like 2 seconds to do if you have metal views, which is Ember 1.8 or higher. So I just upgraded the app, and then we had it. But let me talk about what, I'll demo first, and I can talk about what it's doing. Okay, ta-da! And if we look in the DOM, this is actually just close to the element, close to the root of the DOM. It's basically just appended to the top, but the app where everything's being rendered is in an entirely different tree. But the button continues to work, the bindings continue to work, everything's wonderful, and it like even remains entangled as I scroll. That's other hackery, but so for all intents and purposes, this feels like exactly what I want. So let's talk about how I accomplish this. And like I said before, the metal views refactoring inside Ember really facilitates this. So before we had string templates, so at the time of render, there was just this big concatenated string, and it was really hard to do transformations or intercept it and do something else. So basically I have a view here that during render creates a new morph. So rather than having a bunch of concatenated strings, there's placeholders for children to render themselves into, and that is called a morph. Morph is how we detect the various boundaries. In the past, you would have seen script tags in your DOM. We have morphs that are more or less invisible. So when I'm about to render a view, the parent typically gives the child a morph to render in. All I'm doing here is I'm intercepting it. I'm creating a new type of morph, and then calling super. And then when it's destroyed, I'm just making sure that I clean up that morph correctly. And that was basically it. So chances are this is just going to become an Ember add-on. No one's going to have to care about it. But the implementation is basically 4 lines of code and then the overwriting stuff correctly. Anyway, so that's cool. But Alex has a question for me.
I forget what my question was. This wasn't planned, this little improv moment. What was my question? Oh, hey, Steph. How do you solve the tooltip problem of having multiple of these things and only having one tooltip and not repeating your DOM?
So when Alex asked me this, I had never tried it before, but knowing how morphs work and how Ember's container views and stuff just know where the boundaries are of stuff, there should be no reason why multiple wouldn't work. So I tried it, and I've prepared this, maybe. One sec, I need two hands to Vim. So now I have two of these lovely guys, and they both work. Both of their bindings work. And it's pretty cool. Yep, that's it. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, maybe I can pull this out into an add-on this weekend, so you guys can all make awesome modals on top of this add-on. Woo!
Any questions for Steph? All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Kevin, why don't you come up here? This is the moment you've all been waiting for. This is the moment where you can think about the 4 great talks and the 3 great stickers that you saw, and you can channel that excitement into something that the whole world, or at least all of EmberConf, is going to see. Yes. So on, I don't know, how do you want to do it, Kevin?
We're looking for a 1.5 second. This is New York City. We're all excited. We love the Ember meetup. Aren't we awesome? What a great community. That's what we're looking for. So it's really 1.5 seconds, but we got to fake it for like 5 seconds so that we can get the video.
Okay. Here. I love New York. Excellent. All right. You all have a break. We're going to be back with 2 more great talks. On your break, please introduce yourself to somebody that you don't know. Say hello. And we're going to take like about 5 minutes, okay? in Boston, Massachusetts, and he's since relocated to Vermont, where he has a season pass to Sugar Bush. You ski or snowboard? Snowboarding.
I ride.
He rides. And at the first time that I met our next speaker, which is probably maybe a year and a half ago or something, you were just getting into Ember, doing some D3 stuff, talking about how Ember and D3 work together, and since then has done some great work, contributed a ton to the ecosystem. Most recently with the project that caught my eye called Front End Builds that he's been doing over as part of his work with at TED, the TED Talks organization. And so he's here tonight to tell us about deploying Ember apps. My friend Sam Selikoff.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. This thing working? Yep, okay. No? Yeah. Do I need to turn it on? It says mic, power. Oh, there we go. Better? There we go. All right, cool. Yeah, so my name's Sam. Thanks for having me. I know it's winter. It's a lot warmer here than in Vermont, surprisingly. So you guys got it easy. I'm a front-end engineer at TED. You can find me on Twitter, Sam Selikoff, and you can shoot me an email too. Thought I turned it off. Let me just quit. Brightness. Is that better? Oh, yeah. Okay, sweet. So, I'm here to talk about deploying Ember apps. Deploying a static app. This is actually kind of a new thing. Like, we've been talking about this for a little bit now as our Ember apps have matured. But if you think about it, not too long ago, all of our static assets were within our server-side apps. I mean, there was only server-side apps, right? And when we worked on the front end, we were working on it in the context of a server-side app. So we would make changes to our JavaScript, our CSS, or our HTML, and then we would just redeploy our app because there was only one app. But now we're in a different kind of world, right? We have data layers. We have JSON APIs, and we have front-end apps which are completely separate from them. And the front-end apps now are where our static assets live, our JavaScript, our CSS, and our HTML. So the question of how to deploy our front-end apps has become just as important as the question of how we deploy our back-end apps. This is kind of a new thing. So what does it mean to deploy a front-end app? Well, we can ask, how do front-end apps get served? So say you visit something like gmail.com. You type it into your address bar, and Gmail is a rich JavaScript application. So what happens is you type the address in, and a server somewhere serves up an index file. It's an HTML file. Let's call it the index. That gets parsed and executed by the browser, and that index file is responsible for bootstrapping your JavaScript app, right? So it has links to CSS and JavaScript files. Now, once those links get executed, your browser is making additional requests for those assets, and so another server somewhere has to respond with those assets, right? So that's how you get your JavaScript and your CSS. And then you have a server somewhere that's responsible for your data requests back and forth. And these could be the same servers, these could be different servers, but this is essentially what it means to serve a JavaScript app, right? We have the index, which acts as the bootstrap file, it kind of loads your application. We have something that serves the index's assets, the JavaScripts and the CSS. And then we have a server that responds to API requests. So now with this kind of understanding, what does it mean to deploy a front-end app? Well, often when we're working in the front end, especially in these front-end apps, something like an Ember app, you can substitute any rich JavaScript application here, but I'll be speaking mostly about Ember tonight. We're often just making changes to the JavaScript and the CSS, right? So step one of a new deploy would be to put the updated JavaScript and CSS on a server somewhere. And then typically we also update that index file because the index file is what links to those new assets. So this is essentially what a deploy is when it comes to a static app. Now, how does this compare with a back-end deploy? Well, server-side deployments, they have become very complex, right? They involve a lot of things. File transfers, sometimes database migrations, dependency installations. They have to reboot their app. So if you think about a Rails app has to reboot, for example. You have to manage active connections when you redeploy an app and maybe queue them to not lose the requests. You have to maybe warm up caches, right? So the list goes on and on. It's very complex to redeploy a server-side app. I think the idea is, if we're just making a CSS change, we don't want to go through that list of things, right? We don't want to do all those things. There's no point to it. If we can avoid it, we should. So essentially, we want to split our front end and back end even more than we already have been, right? So it essentially becomes another argument for separating these two pieces of our applications. Development, testing, and now deployments have become isolated, independent, and fast. So there's trade-offs here, right? This takes another step to set this up to get your architecture working like this, and there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There's trade-offs involved. So am I saying every Ember app should be deployed in this way, completely separate from the back end? Well, no, probably not. The main cost with setting this up is complexity. There's more moving parts. So is it worth it? Well, one way you can think about answering this question is thinking about your application's complexity. So typically, this is very scientific, by the way, so no, actually, it's not even. So typically, development time on the x-axis, right? And as you spend more time developing your app, what tends to happen is it gets more and more complex, right? That's kind of the black line. And at some point, it's worth it, right? At some point, it becomes worth it to separate, because once you pay the upfront cost of separating out your deployments for your front end and your back end, the marginal cost, the marginal complexity of each additional deploy goes down, right? So at the beginning of an app, you're just starting a brand new app, you have your front end piece and your back end piece, right? Your Ember and your data layer. And you just want to iterate on those, and you want to deploy them together. And taking additional time to set up this extra layer of abstraction, it's more costly in the beginning. So that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is in terms of architectural complexity. So there's kind of a spectrum here you can think about. On one hand, we have kind of a one-to-one relationship between our front-end app and then our data layer. So maybe we've just split it up for any number of reasons, but we basically have our Ember app, and then we have one data server, and they speak to each other. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you can think of like an enterprise environment within a company or an organization where you have many, many independent data services and then many front-end interfaces that are speaking to those data services, right? And you could have developers working on all those pieces have no idea about the other pieces. So I think as you move more towards the right end of the spectrum, again, it becomes more worth it. It becomes worth paying this upfront cost to kind of lower the marginal complexity of doing additional deployments or serving new front-end interfaces. So ultimately, it kind of depends on the environment you're working in. And for the rest of the talk, I'm going to kind of focus on the right end of the spectrum. So assume we're working in an environment with many data services, many front-end interfaces. That's kind of where these approaches make sense. So again, the main idea here is we want to avoid redeploying our backends if we're just making front-end changes, right? We kind of have two options. We have hosted options, and then we have open source options. The main idea with the hosted options, and these are things like Heroku Build Pack or DivShot, and there's others, is that you have a static asset server that you pay for, and that server serves up your static assets. It's very simple to do a new deploy. Usually it's just a post commit hook, so you just git push Heroku. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. It's the same idea with DivShot. And then these static asset servers, they usually provide a proxy for your API layer so that you don't have to worry about configuring cores or anything like that to actually get your API requests from your Ember app to hit your own data servers. So you have your own data server somewhere, and then you put your static assets, you pay to put your static assets up on these servers, and they kind of figure out how to route the data requests to your data servers. So that's kind of how all these work, more or less. You know, the main con is it can get expensive, and also the proxying can involve some extra hops, and it can just slow things down a little bit sometimes. But that's the basic idea with how to implement this strategy through a hosted option. And then we also have some open source options, right? You can always roll your own. You can basically run Ember build, and then you can just kind of rsync the dist folder up somewhere. But it's a little rough, and you don't get all the nice features like rollbacks and some of the things we'll talk about. You could try to build your own proxy server the same way that the same solution that the hosted solutions like Heroku provide, but that's complicated and it requires maintenance. Or you could just separate them completely, serve your front end and your back ends on completely different domains, but then you have to worry about course configuration, which can be cumbersome. So there are some Ember CLI add-ons in the community that kind of exist to help you with the front end portion of this, but they still kind of leave the back end portion up to you. So we didn't really see anything that kind of try to tackle this problem from front to back. And so that's kind of where we started thinking about what we could build that would solve this. So the other way is the library I want to talk about today, which is front-end builds. And this is something Ryan and I have been working on at TED. And this is kind of, the goal is to offer an end-to-end solution for how to get this strategy of deploying your front ends independently from your back ends in an environment where you have many, many services, many data services, many interfaces, and developers working on each who have no idea about the other sides. So yeah, I just want to mention this. This is all inspired by Luke's 2014 RailsConf talk. Like all these ideas basically came from that. If you haven't seen that yet, especially if you're interested in implementing this kind of infrastructure within your organization or company, you got to watch it. It's a great talk. I've seen it like 3 or 4 times now. It's great. And I think a lot of the community has run away with it and done some really cool stuff. So yeah, all the credit goes to him. We're just trying to implement. This is kind of one implementation of those ideas. So thanks, Luke. So front-end builds. Basically, there's 2 pieces here. We have a back-end piece and we have a front-end piece. So the back-end is a Rails gem. And now we're going to be talking specifically about a Rails back-end with an Ember front-end. The idea is kind of generalized, but for now, these are specifically the problems that we're solving because that's what we use within our organization. The backend piece is a Rails gem called front-end builds. It's basically a Rails engine, and it lets you perform CRUD operations on new front-end interfaces. So you can create a new interface, you can delete it, you can edit it. It also lets your data servers serve up those front ends very easily. And then it gives you a nice admin interface that lets you kind of roll back and preview new builds. And I'll go over more of that in a little bit. And then the front-end piece is an Ember CLI add-on. It's called Ember CLI front-end builds, and the add-on, this takes care of basically deploying the new assets to S3 and then deploying the index to the front-end builds enabled backend, right? Because that's the two pieces that a new front-end static deploy consists of. So let's talk about the Rails engine. So you have your Rails app. This is acting as your Ember app's data API. And so it's going to serve up your Ember app. Now remember we said when you first type in gmail.com and your browser parses that, it's getting the index, right? The index is acting as your Ember app's bootstrap file. And so that's what we need to do. We need our Rails app to serve up the index for our Ember app. And now it's actually very easy to have it serve up multiple Ember apps because, again, it's just serving up this index file. So doing something like this, having your data service serve up multiple interfaces is very simple. And that was one goal of ours. So I'm just going to run through like how this looks if you were to install it. You basically add the gem to your gem file in your Rails app. It comes along with some migrations, just some tables that actually are a place to store the apps that you've created and the builds that you're going to be pushing. And yeah, it's really simple. Once you install it, you then mount the admin. So if you've never worked with an engine before, this is kind of the pattern that most Rails engines take. We have the admin interface, which is where you actually you say, I want to create a new interface, and it tells you how to push a new build to it. So you mount that directly at some URL within your routes folder, and this lets you put the admin interface under whatever authentication scheme you might be using within your Rails app. So you just add that. Here's kind of a little demonstration. Once you add it, here there's no authentication. It was just an example. And then what we're going to do is show what it's actually mounting, which is this admin interface. So you start your server, and then when you visit the URL you just specified, it kind of shows you this is just the basic interface. And then it's time to make your first app. So you just create a front end. Just click create a front end, you give it a name. let's say my CRM. So in this case, we're having an interface for some like customer resource management tool. And it tells you that it's made it, and it tells you there's no active build. And then it gives you an API key, and it says, okay, here's how you set up your Ember app. You add the Ember CLI add-on, and then the API key is basically how those two pieces are going to talk to each other. So that's it. You can just start creating the interfaces. And again, each one of these is an Ember app, and it's going to be deployed by this Rails backend. Now finally, once you make the app, you say, okay, I made an app, it's called My CRM, but where do I actually want users to see it? So what URL do I want users to visit that will actually be served the app? And that, again, you just put within your routes.rb. You just identify the interface by name, and then you give it a route. So here, /acme/customers, when our users visit that, they'll get served that app. So that's it for the back end. That's how you set up your Rails data layer for that. When you want to push a new build, this is kind of where the front end piece comes. So again, we have our Ember app, and there's two pieces here. We want to put the index. We want to notify the front end builds enabled Rails app of our new index. And then we want to put our new assets, JavaScript and CSS, up on S3. Right now, we're using S3 because it's what we use at TED. But feasibly, you could use other asset hosts for these pieces. So this looks very similar. I'm sure this looks familiar to you guys. You just install the add-on. And then you have to run this configuration. This is kind of where the front-end piece gets the details for the back-end piece and how they talk to each other. So we made this little setup where you just run Ember deploy setup. It's going to ask you essentially, okay, which environment are we going to deploy to, right? So you can have multiple deploy environments, staging, production, development. So we say staging. It's going to ask you what the name of your S3 bucket is, so where you want to put your assets. It's going to ask you which interface we're working with here, so my CRM in this case. And then what's the API key? And that was given to us in that admin interface. And that's kind of how we can authenticate these two to talk to each other so that we know the person who's trying to deploy is allowed to. And then finally, it asks where that data server is. Because again, it has to notify it. It has to push the new index to that data server. And that's it. It creates this deploy.js file for us. We can add our AWS keys. And we have ideas for how to kind of streamline this process even further in the future. But for now, this is essentially what's happening. We just need this config generated. And then once we have it, we can just do a new deploy. So we just run Ember deploy. We pass the environment in. And then we have our new build. So we run this code. We see it's going to run Ember build. It's going to create a static version of our app. And it's going to notify the backend of the new index, and it's going to upload the new assets to S3, right? And once that happens, if you visit the admin interface, you now see the active build that's being served up at the URL you said. And you can visit the app. You can see all the builds. This is an example after several pushes. You can see which one's live. You can activate and deactivate different builds, and then you can click on the link, and it takes you to the live version. You can also click on the link for any of the builds, and it will pull up that version of the build for you in your production environment, right? So this is kind of and again, a lot of these ideas are from Luke's talk, but when you have control over the entire life cycle of this process, you can do some really cool things like this, where you can push a new build, you can choose not to activate it, you can visit it before you activate it, so only you see it and your users don't, right? There's all sorts of possibilities here. So there's a little bit of setting up, and we can ask, is it worth it? I can pause here really quick if anyone has any questions about what I've talked about so far, or yeah. I can just repeat the question too.
Yeah, would this work if you have like a QA production environment?
I'm sorry?
If you have like a QA, like a staging environment, could like the deploy.js file like be able to differentiate?
So the question is, do you have a QA environment for deploying?
Yeah, you have one, a QA and a production that have like different keys.
Yeah, so staging is what we usually use for our QA. Is that what you're asking? So we would have two different environments where the staging version of the Rails app, let's say, is running. And here we can deploy to that staging version so people can QA it before it goes live. And now, with this, you can also push a build directly to your production environment, but not enable it right away. So you can push it to your production environment, but it's not going to start being served to your users until you tell it to. There's basically an option that says, okay, I don't want to automatically enable it. And then you can give a certain link that has a query param. And so when you visit it, you'll see the actual new version of your app in a production data environment, but your users won't see it. And that allows you to smoke test different versions of your app directly in production with everything else the same. It's not staging anymore, it's actually production. It's just your users don't see it, because what's happening is when the request comes in, the Rails app is fetching the version of the index file, which, remember, boots up the Ember app. So the version of the index file is what determines what version of the Ember app gets loaded. So what happens is when the request comes in with, say, a query param, it looks within the builds table and it fetches the appropriate build, and then it serves it up. So that way you or your QA team can look at different versions of the app than what your users see, but still be in the production environment, right? So there's a couple different ways you could go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh.
Other questions? Yep.
Typically, in bigger organizations, there is continual integration, and there's also a lot of testing going on, automated testing via other variety of different methods like Selenium and stuff like that. How does this fit into that scenario?
Yeah. So the question's about automated testing and maybe a continuous integration environment. So there's just a few commands that it takes once you get this thing configured. So the initial setup is kind of like the one-time cost. Subsequent builds to deploy are just Ember deploy specifying the environment. And then it builds the new app, and then it updates it. Now, you can configure it so that it doesn't automatically update it, and there's going to be, it doesn't automatically activate the new build. So it would actually push the new build, update the new assets on S3, it would put those assets on S3, it would put the new index within your Rails app, but users wouldn't see it. At that moment, you have an opportunity to run your tests, see if it fails or passes. If your test fails, or if your tests pass, you can say, okay, go ahead and activate it. And there's a command line way to do that, essentially. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
So,
The one type of thing that I would kind of caveat to that is that I would, as a system engineer or as a DevOps myself, I wouldn't want
I'm
to
not
even
DevOps.
have, yes, I would not even want to have any code up that is not passing tests or anything of that nature.
okay, so, I mean, certainly you could do
Can
Ember.
you do it locally or
So
something?
you could do an Ember, so if you wanted to configure your CI server to say, okay, first run Ember test. And then only if that passes, okay, now Ember deploy. Right? So that would be a way to short circuit the deploy at all. So that would be one way to do that. And again, the idea here is these deploys, this is a static deploy, and so we've only changed the static assets. And so we're not going to be, unless we opt in, we're not going to be rerunning, let's say, the entire test suite for our data layer, right? Because that's something like, if I've just changed the CSS, if I had to redeploy my entire Rails environment, now I'm running all the specs again against all this code that has not changed at all, and it would no way be affected by the changes I've made. That's kind of what we're doing here. And so, again, in the environment that I work in, like a lot of times I'm just working on a new interface for some existing data service, and I'm just iterating kind of on the interface a lot. And I just want to be able to say, okay, yep, push it, keep pushing it, and it just takes, 10 seconds, 15 seconds to get the new version up in production, right? Or behind a flag, behind a query param. So, but I think, yeah, you can run Ember tests either before or after the deploy and short circuit that automatic deploy. So.
Cool. Question: security for the deploy config file. Do you think would you recommend checking that file? I hope not like checking that file into source control, but how do you deal with it if you don't?
Right. So right now what we do is basically environment variables. So it's a deploy.js. It's not a JSON file. It's basically it's a JS file that's exporting the JSON, and that lets you do things like grab the environment variables.
That runs in like a node context where you can say process, study, and video.
Yep, exactly. And so, yep, so that's how we do it, environment variables. Yep.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay. Keep going.
Some more questions. Yeah, in front.
Sorry.
So what's the cost of running this in your Rails environment? Like, in terms of, would you imagine splitting it out into its own app or something? Like you mentioned.
Oh, so you're saying why is the backend tied to Rails?
It was a little weird, especially the routes file. Like you have to put things in your routes file that you basically added to your database. Like there's a lot of weird. So
Setup.
Yeah, it's in state of flux, but obviously
Right.
it seems a little weird. So
Right. So yeah, and just to be clear, like yeah, the whole project is definitely in like alpha stage. The question was why, why are we configuring? Why are we adding? Serving up our front-end interfaces from within our data app, right, our data layer. So just to give you some context, like at TED we have several large data services that act as the data layers for lots of our data. And interfaces often consume only pieces of that. Now you can imagine if you just had the data you needed in a single database table, let's say, in a Rails app, and then you want an Ember front end, those kind of go together. So the question is, okay, well, we can either create this new interface, put it somewhere, and it kind of goes back to the options I covered in the beginning. We could put it on its own domain and have it speak to our existing data layers, but then we have to do CORS configuration, right? We could have a proxy server that lets those API requests pass through so we don't have to deal with CORS, but then we have to set up a proxy server and maintain that. So this is a way, because when you put it within the routes RB file of your Rails app, it's the Rails app, which is also providing the data, the JSON API. That's also what's rendering the initial index that bootstraps your app. So in that situation, both the Ember app and the data requests are coming from the same domain, so you don't run into the CORS issues. So it's basically, again, it's like you're in an environment where you are adding new interfaces. The cost of adding a new interface is very simple. You just create it. You say, I want it served here, and then that's it. You can just deploy to it, and your data layer is none the smarter. So that's kind of the motivation for that. Again, if you weren't going to do this, you'd either have to worry about CORS configurations, you have to pay for a hosted service like DivShot or Heroku, or you'd have to create like a proxy server. So that's it's kind of like there's trade-offs with all of them, and this is, this works very well in a lot of circumstances. So.
I just want to add something to what you're saying because I have experience with deploying what Luke suggested in his video, and the way we did it, we just had an API endpoint where we would tell it that we would tell our Rails server that we want this version to be now available to our users. So it's basically the same thing. It's just the only difference is that you have a UI. So it's actually a very comfortable way of making this deployment. So it doesn't feel at all like it doesn't add, from our experience having in production, it didn't actually add any overhead. It's just another endpoint, but instead of having a Rails an API endpoint, you have a UI that you could use in addition to the API endpoint.
Yep. Thanks.
So in Ember CLI, there is an index.html that comes with it that, as part of the Ember build, is updated with various stuff from the config environment.
Variables.
So how do you reconcile that index.html with the one that Rails is serving?
So that is the Bootstrap. That is the Bootstrap file that gets sent to the Rails server.
Okay.
And the gem. So again, like there are add-ons right now that take care of that half of it for you, but you still have to write the backend code that says, okay, here's the new index. I'm going to put it in Redis, like Luke talked about, or I'm going to put it MySQL, or I'm going to put it on the file system somewhere and then serve it up, right? So that's kind of what the backend, that's what the Rails gem takes care of. So it notifies it using the API key, which is over an HTTP request. And then the Rails server says, okay, I'm going to take that, shove it in the database. And now when people ask for it, I know I'm going to serve that. So it's as if they're serving a static file. It's just a string that's in a database. But that way you avoid the CORS issues. So, yeah. Okay, so I'll finish up the rest. So there's a little bit of setup involved. It's not too bad, but it's just another thing for people to learn more steps. Is it worth it? Well, this is basically a laundry list of what this solution gives you. It gives you really fast deployment of your Ember app. And again, if you're just a front-end developer and you're iterating on some new interface and you don't want to worry about redeploying some, really old, large, data API as part of you just wanting to fiddle around with some new interface, that's really, really nice.
It's independent from your back end, and so there's fewer chances for hiccups, right? Because you don't have to do all those things that we talked about are involved with a new server-side deploy. It's just a really simple way to serve up your Ember apps because you don't have to worry about cores. It's the same domain. And you know, it has this admin interface, which is really nice. You can even send this to you know, people on your product team who aren't developers, and they can say, okay, I know we're working on this feature. Let me find this feature, and I'm just going to check it out. And they can just see how it works. Again, in your production environment, they can see how it works with their user data. So there's just a lot of nice things that come out of this. And again, there's even more possibilities. We're just kind of at the beginning of this, but something Ryan was just experimenting with is this add-on he threw together is called Ember CLI New Build. So you'll see here in the back is this is an interface that's being served up in this way. And in the foreground, we have a terminal. The terminal is going to do a new deploy via the method we just talked about, Ember deploy, builds a project, updates the assets, and now the app that was served, the user is using the old version. But we were actually able to say, oh, you got a new version because, again, since the Rails app is serving up the Ember app, we can do things dynamically at the moment where it fetches the index bootstrap file from the database and then serves it up. In this case, we're injecting the version into a meta tag. So what version of the app is the user currently using? And then because the front end has our add-on, or it has this new add-on, it can ping the back end and say, okay, what's the current version? Maybe every 30 seconds, every couple minutes. So it's really cool. I'm just going to play it again in case you missed it. So you're using this app. This happens in discourse, right? Some developer makes a new build, and then you have the chance within your app to say, hey, there's a demo application that's been updated. Your application's been updated. If you want the latest version, go ahead and refresh, and you'll get the new bootstrap file, you get the new assets, right? And you basically get this for free. Like, this is free because you have the solution that covers both ends of this. And you know, there's a lot of other possibilities too. You can inject, now that you have the version, say you have analytics code that's running in your Ember app. Now the analytics code that tracks the user engagement, the user interactions, you can send along the version of the app they're using. Or what if you get an error and you send it to a logging service? Now you know exactly what version of the app they were using. You can go back and run that version in production just by clicking that link and try to recreate the error, right? So there's a lot of cool things that come out of this, and we're kind of just at the beginning of figuring out what kind of possibilities it enables. So that's basically my talk. If this kind of stuff excites you, you should talk to me about, you know, maybe joining us at TED. We're working on a lot of cool stuff like this. We work with Ember. We have Hack Weeks and Learning Wednesdays. This is actually kind of what I worked on this week. So again, just feel free to come talk to me afterwards if this stuff interests you. And that's about it. So thanks a lot for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. And I will say, and Matt, you can come start to get set up. I'll just say I'm really excited about this. The response to sharing the ideas, which really I cannot take credit for. It came as a collaborative effort between Steph and Chris and Ray and the whole team at Yap kind of like noodled on these ideas because we were so frustrated with deploying slow Rails deploys for, you know, JavaScript or CSS only stuff. Anyway, but it's so great to see the community coming together, and the work that Ryan and Sam have been doing is awesome. And so what I'm excited to see is, you know, over the next year or so, to see the Ember community kind of come together and settle on some of these solutions and best practices and ideas, and just leverage it so that this idea of like this new thing of the Ember CLI new build concept is something that is just part of the kind of lingua franca of the community that everyone just can implement very quickly and very cheaply, because it's, you know, all the tools are baked in and the concepts are well known. So great work, guys. Thank you so much for sharing. Our next speaker, you heard from his partner Corey earlier, Matthew Beal of 201 Created, of Ember Minicore, Road to Core, has been doing amazing work on contributing to Ember, particularly around HTML bars, and is here to tell us about what we're going to see in Ember 2.0.
Cool. Can you hear me? I think Flux is off. Yeah, until sunrise. We're not going to be here that long. It's okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great, cool. So, do here? Sorry. Okay. So Ember 2.0 is coming, right? It's going to be exciting. Woo! Come on, yeah. But until then, we have a couple steps to get there. So what I want to go through today are some of the ideas with a bunch of new APIs that are landing in 1.10 and what we can do with them. So I'm Matthew. I blog at madhat.com and tweet a little bit. And like Luke said, we have a consulting company, 201-created.com, and we love working with Ember. So like I said, a bunch of new APIs and things are coming. So this is something that I'm not really going to talk about in detail, but in Ember 1.10, there's services are landing. So you can do this ember.inject service on line 5 there, and then down at the bottom, this service, an app services session, will be like available. No mecking around with the app injection register API or any of that stuff. You can also do ember.inject.controller and get controllers. You can see like the little magic thing on line 5 where you don't even need to say session. It just knows because you're putting it on a property named session to look for the service named session. Amaze your children. So another thing that's changing, is it definitely on? I can't change brightness, that's for sure. I can quit. Well, it's dead. Maybe the projector is. Whoa, it was the GPU. I blame NVIDIA. Okay, sorry. A second thing that's coming in 1.10 is we're going to change the, because we're landing HTML bars, we're going to change the way that we reference your compiler. So in 1.9, you would have handlebars as a dependency, handlebars 2.0. In 1.8, you would have handlebars 1.3, and then you reference Ember itself. In 1.10, you're going to reference 1.10.0, and you're going to look for the Ember template compiler. And this is kind of future safe for us. So say we decide to get rid of HTML bars tomorrow and change it to DOM bars. We don't need to point at yet another dependency. You just always use Ember template compiler, and it will give you whatever you need to compile templates. So it's going to be really nice. And then ember.debug.js. If you use ember.js, it'll still work, but just like throw a deprecation that we want you to use debug so you really know what's going on. And then the other wonderful news is HTML bars is landing, which at this point is a very nebulous concept because we've exploded it out into a million little pieces so that you get to have a little bit of joy every 6 weeks instead of one big bundle. And as we land these new APIs, it means we're going to change how we actually develop our applications a little bit. We're going to have some new patterns that we have to pick up. So one thing is we're getting rid of scopes, and we're going to try to focus more on variables. So we deprecated context switching in 1.9. So instead of saying each model and iterating over model, and inside of their name is basically this.name. So it's each one of the things that's on a model array. We instead explicitly pop that off into a variable called person, and then we call person.name. The context is the same. So on this template, on line 3, we have a different context. This means something different on line 3. Down the bottom on line 3, this still means the same thing it means on line 1. It's always going to be the same context, and you don't need to guess when you're looking at a template. That doesn't matter on a small example like that, but on this example, like, there's your scope. And if you scroll down past that each, would you have known that you're in a new scope? Or would you have known that they use the in syntax? Who knows? And then it changes things like this too. So like the view helper here is a possible new scope. Maybe it's doing something to my scope and maybe it's not. And by having this hard and fast rule that no helpers can change the scope, it means you can trust third-party APIs and you don't need to guess like what did they just do? What is my new this in this context? So it's going to make things a lot easier to reason about. It's going to make things a lot easier for new people to get up to speed. To help us do this, we've introduced a concept called block params. So block params allow us to take that syntax that we had for person in model and use this model as person syntax, which is going to be a little bit more flexible for us. It works the same way. On line 3, your context has not changed. It's still the same thing as you had before, but now you got to pass in person. So the whole like API really looks like this. In your component on the bottom, you would have a yield statement, and then your usage of that component up on top, you just have a block like normal. If you want to add a block param, you add a block param on the bottom, you say as, you can put in the block param. You can pass multiple params, and you just separate them with spaces, no commas. And then you could even do like wacky things, like you can yield, well not wacky, but we do this all the time. You can yield as many times as you want. So say you want something that's actually going to be like options or something like that. You don't need to write the each inside of the yield statement. You can actually put it inside of the component and just yield it over and over and over again, which can make things really convenient. Second thing is we're moving away from controllers in 2.0, and so this is obviously not something that's in 1.10, but we're moving toward it, and we're also moving toward getting rid of views. These are two things, and the reason that we're going to get rid of these is because it's far easier for people to understand like one of these concepts. They're really actually already pretty similar. In controllers, you receive an action, right? This is something a component here is already doing. You provide template scope. This is something that a component can do. You handle events. Components can already do this. You describe the element of that part of the DOM. So if you want to say this component is an LI or this view is an LI, and these are all things that components can do just as well. So we can go ahead and merge them together. And Tomcats had this in the 2.0 RFC, and they, when they tried to talk through this in more detail. For new users, this makes a really big difference. I don't know if you guys remember when you started using Ember and the difference between controllers and views and needing to reason about where you put things and where you should put certain behaviors and state. This makes it a lot simpler to just have one primitive that they need to learn and nothing else. So great, like this still doesn't do all the things that you're probably doing with controllers and views though, right? You've got like an app that's got modals and custom select things and all kinds of stuff, and none of the APIs that I just showed you provided all that you needed. Because we all have like our own special mega hacks. So we don't have every use case, but we're working on it. So what I want to do is run through some ideas that we have. Not all of these are, definitely not all of them, I don't think any of them, are like 100% solid things that we're definitely going to have in Ember 2.0, but they're all like ideas that we've kicked around that seem like they're viable ways and useful tools. And then we're going to look at an experiment of how to use them. So some ideas. One thing we've talked about, and I think is in the RFC, is the mute mutt helper. Somewhere someone is rolling their eyes at me. But yeah, we're not quite sure to say it, mute. But mute allows you to flag something as being modifiable. So in Ember 2.0, we want to have components such as the one up there with x-input. Anything you pass into it will be one way. So all your data will only flow down. You won't be able to change that value once you receive that value in a component. In order to be able to change the value, you have to be passed it as the mute, or else you will not have permission to change it. Permission to change it also means you get a slightly different API on line 4. You see we're accessing adders, which is going to be in 2.0, and we access name, and that value is like a single value. So you set that value with a new thing, or you can call get on it with just a normal open close parentheses, no argument, and you pull the value from it. This get set syntax is up in the air a little bit. The adder syntax is obviously very new, so there's a lot of new ideas here, but that's the idea behind it. Something that I've been toying around with that I really like is currying an action, or creating a closed over version of an action. So where I say bind action save, what I want to do is look at my, well, in today's Ember, you would look at the controller and look at its actions, and it has one called save. So I'm going to pluck that off. I'm going to wrap it in a closure so that it always runs on the controller, and then I'm going to pass it as a variable, as a function, into this input. And now I can call it directly because it's just a function, right? And this is powerful because I can pass this around. So if I want to pass this to another component downstream from me, I can keep tossing this around and different people can use it in different ways. And also, it's far easier for a new developer to understand how to call a function than to call send action and a name and a string and all these other things. Ref is an idea that's, I think those are the, well, these are the two that I care the most about. But these are some other ones that are floating around. Ref is a way to kind of, within your current scope, so your template is that one big scope, within that scope flag a different, flag one component as having a label, and then reference that label from an action. So when you click on this button, I want to call the play action on the video player. And this I think is kind of up in the air because we don't have, the idea that it's limited to your template scope like this is maybe too limiting, or maybe it's too globally to have this kind of tool, so this is a little bit up in the air. Set kind of wraps that syntax that we had before for the mute, right? So mute was like great, but you had to call that .name.set, and you can imagine often you just have a value change, and you just want to say, well, this thing changed, so I just want to call that set on it. And this would allow you to do that with a really simple syntax. You just call set, and it would just wrap it in that hook for you. And the last thing, this is actually in a pull request. Robert Jackson and some of the other folks who work on the Ember form validators, or was it Ember CLI form helpers or something like that? I can't remember. It has form 4. They really want scoped helpers. They want something that's like the Rails helpers form 4, where you then have like a f.input for your input and f.label for your labels. And this is a way to provide that syntax. So you can say form helpers are really any kind of POJO or thing on your component. You can yield in that collection of helpers as form helpers, or you could yield in just that one helper by saying like form helpers dot input in this case. And then down on line 3, it's passing as a block param. You just reference it as f.input. And that would probably also work with the tag syntax. You could do the open, you could do the less than f.input syntax as well. So those are all cool ideas, and they're neat, but I wanted to actually toy with them and see what they're like to use. So if any of you do have your laptops open, you want to look at how I did the implementation. I can't believe nobody had used Cowboy Code at Bitly, but you can go to Cowboy Code, and there's the gist that shows the implementation of some of those things. None of it is very complicated. They're all pretty simple implementations that you can probably read through and understand really well. But I want to walk through an experiment of what the usage actually looks like. So this is the toy that we're going to use. We have a selected value on the top. This will select, which is going to show us like a staging value that we can confirm or we can not confirm, and then a bunch of different options. If I click on yellow, it puts yellow into my like will select. I've chosen it and put it into this little buffer. If I click confirm, then it actually says, okay, great, that's the thing. And if I go back and click on red, it would put it back into the stage. So this is like this really simple tool that's going to show us some of these component message passing things. So if you look at Bitly 1 Cowboy 1, you can see the you can take a look at this guy. And just to show him off really quick, this is the really basic implementation, kind of just like we described, right? So I change this to blue, it changes my staged value, I say confirm, and it goes up. And the thing that makes this a reasonable example is because this is representative of what you end up doing in applications when you have a lot of nested components. We have different points of state there, right? We have the state on top, which is the real state. And then we have this kind of fakey state that's in the middle that we want to be able to toggle back and forth and change to other values that we may disregard at the end of things. So let's get rid of the outlook and take a look at our actual implementation. Here is our selected item. And it's got my temporary selected item. If I look over here, my component, the state is going to be the same for everything. But if I look down at my components, it's really simple components. He gets passed in the temporary selected in the select action. So here he's sending that select action when he needs to. His component then is down here. He's got a button that confirms. He shows the will select. This actually fires select from inside of the item menu component, which is at the bottom, that has an action on line 33. And that sets selected. And we have this like selected that actually leaks down through this whole thing that is stored on the controller over there on lines 14. And I think if you guys have built like complex Ember apps, you have this kind of stuff too, where you have these temporary values polluting your controllers that aren't really related to a controller. They're a very narrow concern, but instead they always bubble up and get in your face. So we're going to take a look at how to get rid of that. Again, this is all on these guys, so if you follow along in between these, you can take a look at everything that's going on here. The first thing we're going to do is introduce some block params. So again, this functions pretty much the same way, but now our selected item is a block. It has an as temporary selected. When we look down at it, it has to have a yield. So it yields, and it yields the value of temporary selected. Now we can keep temporary selected on line 23 scoped to this component. So we don't need to leak that out anymore, which is pretty nice. And then inside of the block, we still have this each item model that walks over everything, and then we put that temporary selected, and we combine it with the item. So what's really cool here is we have one thing that's coming from the component that was yielded in as a block param, and we have one other thing that's coming from the controller scope. So we're able to like mix and match these state values as we need to. So that's a simple example of block params. This next one, we're going to look at the bind action helper. And again, these all just run, do the same thing as our first example. So in this one, this guy who was on the bottom before, he was communicating his state by setting that temporary value directly, right? But we try to adhere to this idea of passing our data down and then sending our actions back up. It's really flexible. It makes it easy to refactor things. So instead, we're going to pass this action down. So by saying bind action select, what I'm doing is taking line 28 and I'm pulling it off, and I'm taking the component instance as well, and I'm creating a closure, wrapping it around them. So by the time I call this.select on line 37 at the bottom over there, you guys can see that. By the time I call this.select down there, what I'm actually calling is selected item component dot, you're calling that action, and it's going to set the temporary selected. So now I don't even need to leak in the temporary selected. All I do is send in the action up as a block param. So I have selected item as select. Select up there is actually my function that I can pass down into the inner component, and that can fire off. The next one that we looked at is a bit more bind action. So this one also pulls something off of this one here also pulls something off the controller. So now we just call this.select instead of doing send action. So we've simplified this down a little bit more. We just call the actual functions instead of doing send action. This next one does bind action as the block param. Is that true? Yeah. So this one introduces a little bit of new behavior. And what we want to do here was show that we can actually pass these all the way down into different components. We don't in all the examples so far, we always just use them immediately inside of the component that was one below us. In this one, we're going to introduce these force menus. So I have these red and yellows, and they confirm and set select. But if I click force, I'm bypassing that middle component, right? I'm bypassing that menu, and I'm just firing it straight from the menu item all the way up to the top. I'm going to skip through this. I'm going to go up. And we do that by saying selected item has a select property, which is the bind action. So this closes over and creates a version of that action that I can call as a function at any time, and it will always call it on the controller. So we pass that in, that's select. This is just pulling a property off. If I look at the yield, here's my bind action. In here, I'm referencing the select. This select is the one that was passed in up here. So I have force select as the second argument. The first select is the bind action that's wrapping over the selected items. This sets my temporary. The second one is a property that already contains the bound action. I yield that in, and I can go ahead and call that directly from on my item menu and just call it as a function. Scroll down to the bottom over there. Yeah, and this guy just calls force select with item. Pretty good, you guys with me? Any questions? Okay, good. And so this next one is yield with each, which is kind of something that we alluded to before and showed off somewhere. So instead of, in our selected item before, we kept iterating over the each item in model. Instead, I'm going to pass in the content. I'll kind of cut off the line numbers, but content equals model up there sends the entire array into selected item. And now in my selected item, I have my will select, I have my button for confirmation, then I have the each block, and inside the each block I yield. So now I can go ahead and pop out 3 of those things, and I don't need to know that I'm going to be iterating or that whatever I want to be doing with it. And the very last one here is mute. So mute was the way to create that value that we can pass around and modify anywhere, right? So instead of being able to just we set it with the setter, and we get it with. I'm trying to think of a good way to talk about it. This is what I mean about new concepts. Okay, so here's select, and we wrap this mute. So now our selected here is not going to be a value, right? On line 14 over there on the side, we have it as null. It's a property, but by covering it over in the mute, now we can call set on it and get on it, and we don't need to have we don't need to know like what the property is anymore. If we look at the component, we can say, what do we actually do with our selected here? Nothing at all. If we look at our yield inside of selected item, here's our selected, which is the third thing that we're yielding. Selected here is a third thing that we're yielding. And then our item menu receives selected as well. So we've passed down this thing that can be set as deep as we want. And when we look down here, we go ahead and get select, and we set it as item. And do we actually have it here in confirm as well? So on the previous example, the selected item we had sent in action. So here it is, select there as a bind action to select, so we had an action. And as an alternative here, we just pass in that two-way value. And now we can call set on line 21 and push that value back up. Yeah, sorry, the question was, does the order and yield matter? And block params are positional params. Yeah, they're ordered parameters. They're not by name, they're by position, just like a function call. And that's the last one of our examples there. So if you guys want to dig through those and poke at how they work and how those tools work, please give them a look. So I think if you start using block params, they come out in 1.10, which is going to be stable in about a week. If you start using them, you're going to quickly want something that handles some of these. The immediate one that I really fell in love with was passing actions, closing over actions and passing them as a function. If you have a modal or something that appears or an alert box and you want to have a button that someone clicks to close it, it was always kind of mysterious before for how do I actually tell the box to disappear without keeping state somewhere else up on the controller. And now it's really clear. I just pass in a thing called close box, and then I reference it inside of another action and call it, and it just takes care of it. So I think you're going to find yourself wanting like a couple of these other tools, and we're going to work towards these and introduce more of them as we get closer to 2.0. So thanks.
Questions for Matthew?
The piece that you mentioned, that like they're replacing controllers with components. Where along the line is the kind of routable controller component piece coming along?
So kind of the first step to that is deprecating the object controllers and array controllers. And deprecating object controller is actually in 1.10. So that part has come along, and then array controller is going to have to be next. We just didn't want to land all the deprecations all at once. So that needs to happen. And then there's some concepts of like model dependent state for non-query params items that need to come in. So say you're on a page and you want, like right now your controller is a singleton, so if you want to remember the state of something, like did someone have this expanded or what have you, you can keep all that stuff on the controller. We need a new place to store that logic, and there's some ideas floating around about that, but there's no code or anything like that yet.
Other questions for Matthew? I have a question. I think for probably for a lot of us, this is the first time that we've seen handlebar sub-expressions, or HTML bar sub-expressions. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what they are and how do you make one, or why, and how does it work?
Yeah, so the sub-expressions were, let me get back to an example with them. So this is an example of a sub-expression up here with the parentheses. The one spot that you might have seen these before in Ember is in query params. That's really the only spot that they've been exposed to anybody. HTML bars makes these a really, basically all helpers in HTML bars behave the same. They all act just like sub-expressions. So they get an argument, which is a set of parameters. So save there is a parameter, or they get a hash, which is a set of like label value parameters, like a component tag would get, because it acts like an HTML element. And so you can compose them and work with them in different ways. I think a really good example of this is that in handlebars 2, sub-expressions can actually be passed after if. So you used to see this sometimes. So if you're going to do an if block is saving or something like that, and then you wanted to do, often you found yourself like wanting to do a case or something like that, but you couldn't really do a case. All you can do is an else. So you have your else value. In HTML bars today in 1.10, actually in 1.9 I believe, you can do else if like this. Actually put value in here. Whoops, sorry, got those backwards. And the reason this works is because if itself is just like a sub-expression. Like they can just be passed around and they can call each other just like any helper can call something. So the way that you would author them is semi-private still, because we're not sure how much of the API to expose. Right now you would author one by doing ember.htmlbars.register helper, and you would register a raw HTML bars helper. That's similar to how you used to be able to register a raw handlebars helper in the past, not an Ember make-bound helper, which is what we normally use. So that's there to toy with, but we're still like figuring out if that API should be exposed and how.
Can you have a if sub-expression that would evaluate to one of the results? Like, I find myself sometimes wanting to just say in line, like if sub-expressions, like if this, then that. Like, could you do that as a sub-expression somewhere, like in
Yeah,
for example?
I think you probably mean something like this. So if I could say like if equal, well, you wouldn't want to say is saving, but like state pending or something like that, right? And so that's another example of something that would be a sub-expression. Yeah.
So just to repeat what Steph heard for the folks at home, there's an add-on called Ember Truth Helpers, is that right? That gives you things like equal, not, a few others.
You can think about sub-expressions like an interesting dialect of like Scheme or a very pure Lisp. The primitives are different, but you can nest infinitely.
Yeah, and when you're calling these, you're calling a function called and. You're calling a function called or. You're calling a function called is-array. They're all just helpers that you're calling. So we've actually been toying with calling them nested helpers, because that kind of describes more of what's going on. It's the same as a regular helper. You could take is-array and you could just output that inside of bare mustaches. You don't need to pass if to it first. You can just call it just like you can call if.
One of the concerns people had, I've seen this in issues, was aren't we just exposing logic back into our templates when we had worked hard to pull logic out of our templates? This logic is still incredibly declarative. It's not any different than the handlebars helpers we have today, except you can compose them in declarative ways. The guts and the logic of each of these helpers is still isolated and can be tested. It does introduce more branching at this point, but it also improves clarity. So win some, lose some, but it's still the declarative over just arbitrary code is the win here.
Yeah, compared to introducing new syntax, all of these parentheses, they just represent an eventual value. And that's kind of why you can swap them out for a variable or a property, because they all represent just an eventual thing that will be updated, a value that will be updated because of a binding changed or for any other reason.
Any other questions? Awesome. Let's give Matt a big hand. All right, so it is that time of the night when we start to get some tears in our eyes and say our goodbyes. But we don't have to say goodbye because we can go out and have a drink together. So here's the spot for tonight. It is called Crooked Vine, I think. The Crooked Knife, sorry. Crooked Knife, we went there once. It was worked out pretty well. They have had a big space in the back. Hopefully they will for us tonight as well, too. So 14th Street, between 7th and 8th, south side of the street. Jorge, in the back, raise your hand. Jorge is going to be our guide, lead us there. So we don't have to leave right away, but Jorge's going to start and take a group out probably in 5-10 minutes or so. So get up, stretch, pack up, chat, and then we'll meet you over there for a drink. Thanks for everyone for coming out. We'll see you on the 26th in the Hacker Hours.